everybody. Are we ready to rock and roll? Right, good morning. I'm Councillor Mike Introna, the chair of this Children and Families Select Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting and note that it's being broadcast live and recorded for publication. Okay, so agenda item 1. I wish to note the appointment at full council on the 27th of February earlier this year of Councillor Anne Callaghan as Vice Chairman of the Children and Families Select Committee for the remainder of this 24-25 municipal year. And it would be remiss of me not to thank Councillor Purdue-Horan, who had been the Vice Chairman up until that point. We've decided to go on Vice Chair another committee, but thank you, Francis, for your contribution. The fact that both yourself and Councillor Callaghan have worked together with me and the rest of the committee in a completely apolitical way to do what's best for the children and families of Nottinghamshire is noted and warmly appreciated. Thank you very much. Right. Hello, Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your leadership on this committee. Can I just also pay compliments to Councillor Purdue-Horan for his work as Vice Chair, and particularly say how delighted I was to see Councillor Callaghan appointed as Vice Chair of this committee. She obviously brings significant experience from her own professional background, and I know is very passionate about this issue. It's an important cross-party area of policy work, and I'm really pleased to see her appointed. She, as you are aware, I think, Mr. Chairman, has an urgent medical appointment this morning, but will be with us, I think, later on. She does intend to come to the meeting, hence myself and Councillor Welsh substituting for Councillor Errol Henry and Councillor Callaghan this morning. But I'm really pleased to see her appointed, and I'm sure she'll work very well with you in cross-party fashion that she has done over many years in this area of work. And compliments once again to Councillor Purdue-Horan for his service.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Yes, I've already had a year or so working with Councillor Callaghan, and I'm delighted that she's Vice Chairman of the committee, and excellent appointment following on from Francis, who did a sterling job as well. Okay, so agenda item number 2. So I'm going to ask for the committee to approve the minutes of the last meeting. We'll do that through a show of hands. Thank you very much. So that's agreed, and I will sign the minutes towards the end of this meeting. Okay, agenda item number 3. Apologies for absence. James, are you able to advise us of any apologies, please?
Chairman, so I've had apologies from Nigel Frith as one of the educational representatives for this committee. We've also had apologies from Councillor Debbie Darby for other reasons, Councillor John McGrath for other reasons, and we have apologies from Callaghan and Councillor Errol Henry for other reasons. And as noted, Councillor Payne and Welsh are here as substitutes for this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And so we go on to agenda item number 4, declarations of interest. If any councillor or any officer has an interest in any matter on the agenda, you should declare it now. So if you do, please raise your hand now if you have an interest to declare. If you have an interest to declare, you should state what type of interest it is and give us brief details. So, Councillor Welsh.
I am a school governor at a local authority school, and my son attends a local authority school.
Thank you very much.
Just for clarity, I mean, it is on my register of interest, but I'm a director and trustee of Diverse Academies Trust, and we have a number of SEND schools in our portfolio.
Okay.
Councillor also indicated.
And Councillor Turner.
Governor at Barking Hill Academy in Worksop.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? No? Okay, thank you. Let's move on. So, agenda item number 5. establishing family hub networks and progress. Okay, so I'd like to invite Councillor Tracy Taylor, Cabinet Member for Children and Families, to introduce the report. And I'd then like to ask any officers present if they have anything further to add. So, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. You've heard me speak about the family hubs at multiple meetings, including full council meetings. So I will keep this intro fairly short. Suffice to say that there was a formal decision made at Cabinet in March 2024 to roll out family hub networks across the county by the 1st of April 2025. We are 15 of 18 in, with 2 openings this week and the final one next week. So that target will have been met. I have to say that's thanks to an incredible amount of work and effort, both by the internal teams and external. So the work with the partners across those networks has been extraordinary. And from the openings which I have attended, many of them, but Councillor Anderson can see has also been on point for some of those openings. Places that we've been to, the energy in the rooms, the enthusiasm in the rooms, you've attended some yourself, is absolutely remarkable, and I'm really proud of the work that's gone into what's been done so far. There is still work in progress, stuff like promotional things, new web pages, establishing a virtual family hub, and that will be hosted on a new platform that will be a county and city services directory. There's stuff to do around reporting and performance systems. And then there's also the implementation of the new early help workforce development plan. And that's more about some of the internal shuffling of job roles, let's say, between family into the family hub team from some of the early help workforce. So there is work to do. But by the end of this month, we will have opened all 18 family hub networks across the county. So happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Well.
Yes.
Oh, hang on. I'm sorry, we haven't moved the recommendations, but before that, I did say I wanted to ask if there were any officers that had any comment. And Irene, I would imagine that you're first to tell us.
Really weird sitting here looking at me like that. Yeah, I mean, it's been a mammoth effort. A lot of people have been involved in it. I think it's important to note, Councillor Taylor has already said there's still a lot to do. And we still have a partnership group that will be leading all of that work. It isn't just to the county council, although we are the lead body. From the 1st of April, because we've had a phased opening of the different family hubs, some will be more ready to accept referrals from the 1st of April than others. But what we are saying to families is contact us. If we can't help, we will find somebody who can help you. So that's certainly something we're doing. As Councillor has already said, with the restructure, we're waiting for that to happen, and then we'll, be really up and running and get all the public.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to move the recommendations on page 25 as detailed in the report, and I seek a seconder for that, please.
Happy to take.
Councillor Quigley, thank you very much. So I'm now going to open to the floor for debate. Councillor Welsh.
Thank you. Family hubs, of course, are incredibly important, and certainly what we've seen and still see with regards to children's readiness for school and their ability, especially since COVID, which is made it even worse, actually, is we're finding more and more children aren't ready for school. The language isn't where they should be. They're not ready to learn, and schools are really struggling with regards to that. And I know certainly in the schools that I visit as a Member of Parliament in my own constituency, but also the schools that I work with in the Gedling area and continue to work with, this is an ongoing issue. It's therefore really, really unfortunate that you've had to do this mammoth job with regards to family hubs, because of course there were Sure Start centres that were in place originally that were supporting families, which of course I was involved with setting up in the first place in this county. So I welcome the family hubs. My question therefore is, so we didn't get any funding from the previous government for family hubs, which is obviously was really, really disappointing, because I think we all recognise here in Nottinghamshire. Whereas we might have some areas that are perhaps affluent where the need isn't great. We also have a lot of areas where there is a lot of disadvantage and a lot of children, young people that start at this level when they should be starting at this level, which is really, really unfortunate, and more needs to be done. And certainly that's what I'm saying down nationally with regards to Nottinghamshire. So my question is, where are family hubs at the moment in compared to where Sure Start was when it's left off? What needs to happen going forward to make it a place where we have health and education once again working hand in hand on the same site? And how much of family hubs is relying on goodwill, which isn't a bad thing, but I'd just be interested to know some of those answers. And then last but not least, which may be in the report, and I know this is really difficult to do, actually, really difficult, but it's measuring that impact. And actually, sometimes some early years, you don't know that impact until they go and do their GCSEs, because it's that, how did they start and where did they get to? But how are we measuring that impact as well?
Okay, who wants to take that first?
I'll start with that one, Chairman, if I may, and then I'll look to officers in the context of things like measuring impact, Irene, if you don't mind. So you won't be surprised to hear me say that I don't quite share some of your views, particularly around Sure Start. I think there's a risk that if we continue to focus on the past, we fail to focus and invest properly in the future. Sure Start was an initiative of the previous Labour government. So we're talking about something 20 years ago now. It hasn't existed for a long, long time. We've had the Children's Centre model operating. Both Sure Start and Children's Centres have focused on the 0 to 5s. And I think the absolute joy and opportunity of family hubs is that spread of support for families with children 0 to 19, 0 to 18th birthday, and then obviously with the extended support for families with children with SEND. So that's up to 25. So for me, I want us to focus on family hubs and not keep harking back to the past. It's not doing us any good whatsoever. And the other important thing for me is about having a building-centric thinking. Family hubs are networks. There are tangible sites where certain services are delivered, but some of the network is ephemeral. It comes from relationships, and it means that we work with partners so that something is delivered in a family home or in a community centre, as well as in certain buildings, be they the old Children's Centre buildings, which are now all rebranded as family hub buildings, or whether it's in a library or any other venue, a venue where a family needs services and we can deliver it through an outreach model or a based model. So there's all sorts going on, from universal support to targeted support across the entire county. So in terms of the specific request for comparison about where family hubs are located compared to Sure Start, I've taken that to be a building centric question. Forgive me if I misinterpreted that.
No, sorry, I wasn't. I was actually talking about, because obviously the last level of Sure Start centres didn't have a building, and so a lot of them were in Gedling actually. I'm talking about the level of services, particularly for that 0 to 5 and being ready, that readiness for school, such as language development support for parents with their children, things like breastfeeding, the healthy eating, weighing babies, development of children, all of those things. Like, where are we with regards to family hubs in comparison? Because that's the bit that really matters at the moment. And that's what the schools are telling me. It isn't me making up. Schools are telling me where the gap is.
You've asked your question.
I've clarified.
We're aware of what 0 to 5 services
So
are.
I will in a moment ask Irene, because she's got that handle on areas of deprivation and focus for need. So she'll reference that in a moment. I think the other thing, your question about funding, again, it's a funny thing because we would always like more funding from government. Either of you across the room from me today can get us more funding for lots of the different work streams. Please do. I'll be there holding the bag while you bang the table for me. But it's a funny thing with the funding that I think we had already committed to developing the family hub networks based on sort of innovative models we were doing about early help and interventions anyway. The fact that we didn't get government funding has actually been more of a blessing than a curse, I would suggest, because the pilot areas were on quite tight modelling and the focus has remained at 0 to 5 in a lot of those delivery areas. We have focused across the age ranges. We've genuinely invested in the 0 to 8 team.
Okay.
We've genuinely invested in that whole age range for children up to their 18th birthday. We've had a degree of freedom because we haven't been constrained by those criterion that came with being recipients of the funding model. So to that extent, I think we have done very well. We are funding what we're doing with, in essence, the council's money, or money that has come through this council, as opposed to external funding streams that could stop at any minute. And then your other question about whether we're relying on goodwill, I think the goodwill that we are relying on is the strength of the relationships with partners, and we do have strong relationships with partners. We're not just relying on partners picking up the bill, if that's sort of the difference in the way we're approaching it. So at the moment, I have confidence and reason to be confident in what we're doing and how we're doing it. And if I may just ask if Irene would pick up some of those things about measuring impact on probably areas of deprivation and how they're served.
Absolutely. So the family hub buildings themselves are still located in areas of deprivation. So they've remained. We have a list of priority neighbourhoods. We've identified those with district councils and place-based partnerships. And if there isn't a dedicated building there, we outreach in those areas. So that could be working in a library, health centre, family homes, as Councillor Taylor has already said. So we do prioritise those neighbourhoods. We know there are children who are least likely to achieve their outcomes, and poverty, life chances, income are absolutely critical to that. So we do prioritise those groups. In terms of the performance, we have developed a Family Hubs outcomes framework. It's based on one that was developed in London, but ours is more local because we've been given that freedom to do it. So within that framework are the 10 ambitions of our Best Start strategy. So that's all under fives and from conception. And it includes additional measures up to the age of 19. So that could include attainment gap at key stage 4, for example, because we want to see how, as a system, we're working in each of these districts and localities. So we're developing local profiles at the moment, and we will be tracking outcomes based on that. The other thing to bear in mind is that we need to be working with parents and carers to see if this is working. Do they feel that this is a trusted service that they can go to? Do they understand what they can get? Did they get a quicker response, and did we meet their needs quicker? We know that for some services it could be a 2-year waiting list. What's happening for those families while they're on that waiting list? And that's hopefully where we can come in as well and support those. So there's a lot of different measures. Some of them are very data driven and others are qualitative, what our family is saying to us. And that's something that's embedded into the work we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Welsh, do you have a...
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. James.
Thank you, Chair. Very much welcome the work that's gone in to the Family Hub networks. Really looking forward from an educational perspective to work closer with this. My questions really are around that dynamic relationship. You mentioned partnership group, not just being the county council. My question, as it often is how involved are educational partners and experts in this? Because the issues that we're seeing, I agree with Councillor Welsh there, that children are not yet school ready, and it's not just about their academic starting point, it's sometimes the social, and the number of young children who are not yet toilet trained when they're coming to reception is one of the biggest barriers to staff in schools being able to do their jobs. So how dynamic is what's going to be offered? Will it be able to respond to changing needs by locality or just generally in a national picture? And to what extent are education partners involved in shaping the priorities for the service?
Again, I'll defer to Irene, but I would say just in general terms from some of the visits I've been on, the involvement of school partners probably varies across the county according to the different needs and networks. But in some of the family sites, we are literally, within touching distance of our school partners, and we've got some very rich and strong relationships. In other places, schools are less engaged. I think we find that about schools for all sorts of different reasons, and we need to know how schools choose to. So I think the family hubs are, or certainly the staff from the council that are trying to run the early help and everything, are reaching out and trying to build those relationships and embrace them. There's evidence of strong relationships in some places. I think Irene is probably better placed to answer in terms of how we're doing that to bring those in that are not as engaged with us at the minute. And then in terms of the dynamics, as you put it, again, I would suggest that's probably needs-based, place-based, needs-based, and I think that's the ethos that we drive from. I don't necessarily have the same needs amongst the population in location X as in location Y. Therefore, let's serve them and seek to meet their needs. Not just assume that because it's not wanted there, it won't be needed there, because it very probably is. Would you like to comment? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at local needs, each family hub network. So let's take Ashfield for example. There's an Ashfield family hub network that's made up of 3 separate local multi-agency groups, smaller networks. They look at their local data, they speak to the local residents, local practitioners, find out what the needs are, and they'll do something about that. So in some areas we know that conflict within families seems to be coming up a lot in terms of referrals, so we prioritise that and do more work. The other thing I completely forgot to mention before is there has been a joint children's and health scrutiny review, and there is a report going to health scrutiny tomorrow on school readiness. So that's where we've looked at all these issues around schools saying, children aren't ready, they haven't got the social skills and so on. It is something we hear from schools. The other thing just to bear in mind is as schools are lowering their age range a lot more, they're coming across children who aren't necessarily ready because their age range is lower. I'm not saying that's the same for every school, but they're seeing it a lot more because they're now taking 2, 3, 4-year-olds. So that's just something to bear in mind. In terms of the links with education, I have to say they're pretty strong in the 2 districts where we first started the work. So Bassetlaw, Newark and Sherwood, that's where we did a lot of testing. We went to Senko networks, head teacher networks, a range of different things. This has been going on now for 3 years. We probably need to go back and do more to try and engage those schools again. But the partnerships I mentioned before, the district partnerships, we would welcome groups. We haven't got education on any of those groups apart from council education services. We've got no school reps, so we would welcome that and encourage that if possible.
Have you reached out and asked for representation?
So the local groups have. Some groups are still very new. So Gedling is just setting up a new group. Rushcliffe is setting up a new group. Broxtow's group is well established. Mansfield, Ashfield, Bassetlaw, Newark and Sherwood have already got groups as well. So if you haven't had an invitation, let me know and we can certainly get out some more information at schools. But it is hard to engage some.
Okay, thank you, Irene.
Could I ask a quick follow-up? Sorry. Is there a strategic oversight higher up than at district level that education could be involved in? Because I take the point that at Bassetlaw there might be an engaging school partner, but I am assuming there's a strategic oversight part, and is that where you could have someone from a multi-academy trust or a successful school? Because yes, the issues can be different by locality, but when I talk to other CEOs, they are talking about the same issues all the time. So if you've got that higher level oversight that's determining the work down, that would be a place to have someone from education in there.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bradley, you want to just comment on the question?
In relation to the question and an additional point perhaps stemming from a conversation at the Mansfield North Family Hub actually last week, and on the point of school readiness, which I'm sure will be discussed in further detail tomorrow, but there has been a pilot with Nottingham University in Mansfield I worked on in a previous life, I think funded in part by Towns Fund, which was about school readiness in particular in the Oak Tree estate and trying to develop further relationships and work with families who are in particularly in that area, which, as I understand, has been successful and demonstrably successful. So there's an opportunity to expand that further, and that's what you were seeking to do currently as well in that space.
Okay, thank you. I know Councillor Callaghan waxed lyrical about the Mansfield Family Hub last week, so yeah, it's good to hear. Councillor Payne, you've got a question, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just, first of all, before I ask the question, want to say thank you to Irene and the wider team. We are incredibly lucky to have you, Irene, and the wider team in Nottinghamshire. This work really matters. I mean, it says, doesn't it, in the report that the Early Intervention Foundation says that the cost of late intervention in life is 17 billion to the economy, but actually much more in monetary terms. It's a lost generation of children, and we all see it firsthand in our divisions and our areas. And I think, notwithstanding the bouncing around of national policy on this, which I think is deeply regrettable over a number of governments, I think the hard work on the ground has continued because of the amazing work of you and your wider team. And I saw that firsthand when I came to visit the Gedling Family Hub at Armbrook School, and I know you've done an amazing job in Netherfield, and the shift in policy doesn't help people like you, practitioners on the ground, which is why I say it's regrettable. But I just want to start by saying what an amazing job you're all doing, and we are very, very fortunate to have you at the County Council. I know personally, Irene, just how passionate you are about this subject as well. Just two things really. I mean, we could have a debate all day about the Sure Starts thing. I was just struck by the experts who have compiled this report, who state very clearly that we should reflect on the past, because if we're going to be evidence-led in this area, the report under paragraph 9 very clearly says there is evidence that Sure Start had an outstanding impact on people. So I hope we're not just going to turn the page and ignore progress that's made under Sure Start. And I think there's significant reports by independent bodies that say that children who lived close to Sure Start or took part significantly improved their GCSE achievements, which I think is something that shouldn't be overlooked or ignored. I'm particularly interested, Chair, in this point about how we make sure we're genuinely reaching those who actually need the help from these hubs, because I think what strikes me is there are a group of people who will know this provision is in place, probably do need support, know how to access that support, then can navigate the support. But we all know that there are families in each of our divisions, and indeed in my constituency, who perhaps will never access this support, and they're the people who really, really need it. So I'm really interested in what more can be done, and particularly perhaps what more can be done by national government about trying to make sure that data sharing between organisations is providing you with the actual data to make sure that we are hitting the people who are most vulnerable here, to give them the best possible start in life. Because it strikes me whenever we're having these conversations, this is not an issue that the County Council can resolve on its own, which is acknowledged, I think, in what you've already said, Irene. You need the NHS around the table, you need the district council, as James has just said, you need the educational establishments around the table. You actually need community leaders and advocates, not just your County Council representatives, but other people. So this point about data sharing and making sure that you've got the information that you need is one that I'm really interested in. And from your perspective, Irene, or anybody else around the table as officers, if there's anything further you think that needs to change to make sure you've got that information, I'd be really interested to hear it. But more power to you, but I think you're doing an amazing job. And I saw firsthand in Daybrook the genuine impact you're having on families. A number of families wrote to me after that day and said how impressed they were with you and your staff. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Okay.
I am going to defer to Irene on this because in a sense it's operational in its detail in terms of the data sharing and also how we actually get to the people that need the help. And I would say a lot of that comes from the strength of the network partners and therefore the referrals in. But I think Irene's better placed to answer.
It's really important that we work with universal services. So everybody gets to see a midwife, everybody gets to see a health visitor. It's those points we absolutely need to make sure that we're working together, and that's where the information sharing happens. So if there's no child protection concern, we rely very heavily at the moment on consent. So we say to a parent, we can refer you here, give us your consent, sign here, and that's what we do. We have got an information sharing agreement with Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust, and that includes us and Healthy Families team and the Children's Disability Services. So we are able to sit there and discuss children and families between those two services. When we're bringing people together as a multi-agency group, you could have Job Centre Plus there, you could have a range of different people there. So it is important that we still ask for consent. Those families need to understand that their information, or some of it, may be shared in a multi-agency group. So it is important that we're upfront about it. Our strength in our partnership is with the NHS, the different NHS bodies. NHS is trusted. Families will go to those appointments. They will see somebody from the NHS. So let's have them in our buildings and let's go to their buildings and let's see what we can do together. We have just, well, it's probably for the last year actually now, improved our process with maternity services. So over a year ago, we will have had midwifery clinics in some of our buildings. Families come in, see the midwife, leave. They're in one of our buildings, and yet nobody's made any sort of connection about, oh, do you need extra support? That's now resolved. There is an automatic consent to contact process now as part of that relationship. It's still patchy in some areas. You know, it's not easy. It's not all simple. But we are definitely getting there with those relationships now, and that is absolutely the way forward. But we do need to keep doing that outreach work. So we need to always remember which families are most at risk. So teenage parents, for example, unlikely to walk in if we're building. We need to go to them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Payne?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay. I'd just like to make a couple of comments if I would. Irene, the work that you and your team do is exceptional. I've been to a couple of the family hubs and I've been to some of the events coordinated, like the one late last year at the Well in Worksop, where I was astonished at the breadth of available support at different stages, particularly in those early years, for all sorts of different matters, whether that was getting helping children speak or whatever it is, certainly preparation for early years at school. And I've personally had a number of situations in recent months where I've been able to direct people to the family hub in Retford with regard to quite a number of issues, whether that's issues with disability, issues with parenting at a young age, issues with parenting at a more mature age, or just general loneliness. And I can't thank you enough for what you've done and some of the help that those people got. I think in terms of getting the word out there, I think we have a duty as councillors, hopefully within the districts and boroughs, but more importantly, our community leaders around our areas in terms of helping make the family hub network known to those that might benefit from it. But I really do want to say what a fantastic initiative and what a great team you're running. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to ask Martin, do you have any comments you'd like to just note?
Yeah.
Give us a summary of the discussion.
Just a couple of things. I think it's probably worth getting in the actually getting the minutes, like yourself and members' appreciation of Irene and the team and the entire service, because obviously everyone's agreed that it does offer an exceptional service. And also thank you for Irene for mentioning the school readiness report. Yes, the school readiness report is at Health tomorrow. And just note that the NTU Oak Tree thing is talked about there in detail, and also there's quite a lot in there about how family hubs and school readiness kind of like linked together. So it was a really good review. So if you've not read it, please do read that.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I'm going to take a vote with a show of hands on the recommendation on page 25. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So, agenda item number 6, which is elective home education. I'd like to invite Councillor Ben Bradley, Cabinet Member for Education and Send, to introduce the report.
Thank you. I think the report speaks itself in terms of the challenge in space increase in demand, but in terms of just following the report, staffing structure, note the selecting this last year, the staffing structure remains the same as it was then, though there has been a really significant rise in the number of families wishing to home educate. We're confident that the staffing structure has a good platform in terms of being able to implement changes that might come nationally through the bill. We're likely to see increased responsibilities around home education. It's not yet clear whether there will be funding to support that. As ever in these spaces, we hope that there might be. More widely, the profile of learners in this space increasingly looking at home education, as you might imagine in the current context, both economically and socially, increased referrals linked to mental health in particular, and particularly, and again, some of the areas you might expect. Of children's services. We have increasingly enabled more of those children to remain on roll at school, which I think is a positive thing, supporting the opportunity to collaborate with them and other services and make sure there is engagement possible with those families and parents, recognising it is up to families whether they want to engage with us on those activities or not. Obviously been a significant national interest in the subject of home education recently for all sorts of reasons, and particularly increase in numbers as well as a number of budget cases as well. So we've had some interest in that on a local level too. Working very hard to try and work with those families and ensure that statutory duties and everybody is accessing the level of care. The report details the numbers in terms of increases as well as those where we've identified that level of education activity is not being met, and talk through some of the implications and work around that. So that's there for colleagues to dig through. But I think that's probably sufficient in terms of introduction. I imagine officers will want to add to that.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley.
Yeah, if I could just say, this is certainly something we've discussed at the Select Committee previously, and the policy update went through a rigorous process with Select Committee members involved in reviewing and adding to that policy, which is really valued. What we do in Nottinghamshire is unique. We do a lot more than a lot of other local authorities in terms of oversight of young people who are not within mainstream education, who are electively home educated, in terms of the visits, the checks, and the support for families that choose to pursue elective home education as a route. Certainly our online presence adds to that in terms of resources that are available to support where that decision has been made. There's a significant number of young people where, if the education isn't deemed suitable, who are returned successfully into a mainstream school. And I think all of that process stands as a good stead for any impending changes to national legislation. Although resources are a challenge, continued risk of with our resourcing. Rates of elective home education have quadrupled in the last 5 years. That's very similar to what we've seen nationally, has been reported in the press. But that adds extensive strain onto the services. And there's been times this year where we've had to manage that resource as effectively as we can. But we proudly work with take. I think we are in a good position. It's an ongoing challenge.
Okay. And Karen, is there anything you want to add at this stage?
I think only to echo everything Peter said and to confirm that numbers of families choosing to electively home educate are increasing to rise. I know you've got the figures there from June 24. As of today, there's 2,080 young people in Nottinghamshire electively home educated.
It's 80.
Yeah, 80.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to move the recommendations on page 31, and I see a seconder, please, Councillor Quigley. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to open to the floor for discussion, and I invite Councillor Payne, please, to.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to officers for the report. I think my only comment would be in reviewing the petition. Obviously, I accept that there are further statutory requirements in terms of the Children and Schools Wellbeing Bill, which has now made its way, it's approaching final stages in Parliament. That we, and I know you will be doing this, Peter and Karen, but that we think very carefully about not only the additional burden on the county council and us as an authority, but on individual families, because I know there is anxiety from some families about the additional requirements as part of the bill. I think they are right, the additional requirements, but there clearly will be anxieties. It does bring an additional burden for families, and I would just encourage you and Councillor Bradley to do what you can to think about how we try and alleviate or mitigate, reassure with families in terms of some of that pressure. And I think I just wanted to make the point, I think Ben, you touched on it in your introduction, that the vast majority of parents clearly make this decision for very good reasons, for right reasons, and it's clearly not an easy decision. But I also think we shouldn't shy away from the fact, and I think Ben alluded to it in his introduction, that the measures introduced in the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill are because we have had horrific cases. Take, for instance, the case of Sarah Sharif, where the judge was very, very clear that home education was being used as a ruse, I think was the quote by the judge in the statement, to hide the multiple beatings, which obviously tragically resulted in Sarah's death at 10 years of age. And so I think the measures in the bill are correct. But I would just urge and press the county council to do whatever it can to reassure those families and parents who are making the decision for the right reasons, who rightly feel anxious about the potential additional burden as they will see it, in terms of reporting. And then the other bit, which is not necessarily for an answer for today, and the county council may not be able to probe, but I am really interested that 37% of parents state ideological and philosophical reasons for taking a decision to home educate children. I'm just really, really interested to understand what sits behind that. Now, clearly, some parents and guardians may say it's a private decision, and actually we don't share any more information than that which we've stated. But I think the state does need to understand in its broadest sense, both the local government and national government, what sits behind some of this, because as you've just alluded to, Karen, if you times 2080 by the number of educational authorities we've got across the country, this is clearly a significantly escalating situation if that continues to increase, both for local government and for national government and the state more broadly in terms of cost, etc. So they would be my two observations. Chair, you may not be able to answer the second question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Payne. Does anybody want to come back on that, please?
Welcome that input, Michael. I think the reasons you describe and all the challenges, the instance, Sarah Sharif and others that you mentioned, you know, I think as an authority, colleagues would welcome the extra oversight in the bill, welcome the opportunity to be more engaged in that. And whilst it is for families in engagement to decide how much support they want to take on, I think the more insight we can have of that to try and prevent those kinds of incidents, the better. The challenge within all of that is, as documented in the report, you know, although the increase in numbers, significant increase again since the numbers that are in here, have gone up very, very significantly. The funding was set way back when, and therefore, you know, extra resources in order to manage that, both from our point of view and also to be able to offer the support that you want us to offer and we want to offer to parents in those circumstances. You know, we will have to find either nationally or locally the resource to do that. In terms of ideological reasons, really interesting question. I don't know if Karen will be able to enlighten us on that one, but you're quite right to point out, and we'll go away and do some, see what we can find out on that front, or if any information is available. That's a third of children in Nottinghamshire, yeah. And as you say, if that's reflected around the country, that is a really interesting question, and you're right, we don't have the answer to it by the looks of it, but we'll do some digging on it and see what we can find.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Payne, you have a supplementary?
No, just sound very grateful. You may not get the answer to that question because it may be something that parents are, you know, wanting to guard and not share, you know, with public authorities, but I do think it's an interesting question more broadly about policy response to these things.
Okay. Michael, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for the insight. Councillor Callaghan. There's a second.
You've got Chair.
Number 2.
Here's my wingman, or wing lady. So we're just looking at elective home education. Colin, you wanted to
make two observations, if I may, Chair. One is in response to Councillor Payne's comment. And I think we do need better insight, better intelligence, better information, Councillor Payne. Because it is true that families identify ideological and philosophical, easier for you to say than me, philosophical reasons for doing that. What I'm intrigued to understand is why it takes them to key stage 4 to do that. Yeah. So we've got children who are going through primary, beginning of secondary, but find their children remaining in school. And you know, I'm going to ask James. The second observation I'm going to make is that for an agenda item a little later on the agenda, Yeah, we have strategic advisor for SEND from the Department for Education. That is Dame Christine Lenahan. Yeah, before the meeting started, Dame Christine shared with me, I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning, yeah, that she'd read the papers on the train on the way up. Yeah, and that she was struck by our elective home education strategy, and our approach was the strongest that she'd seen, yeah, or read, yeah, of all the ones that she's read. And I understand. I've read many. Quite a few. Very good.
Okay. Thank you, Colin. Councillor Turner.
Just out of interest and put everything into perspective, and 2,080 families within the county chosen to go down this route, and it would be interesting to know the actual percentage of families, what that represents, and it's basically all about the ideology. Yeah, we'd love that as well. So I think if we could put some sort of meat on the bone there, that would be good.
Okay. Any comments? Peter.
Just, I think that's a point well made. So we sometimes in this committee talk about data in different ways, don't we? And we talk about numbers and we talk about proportion. I think it's probably helpful for us to take that away and build into our dashboards a proportion of the population alongside the percentage, whether that's a rate per 10,000 or whatever. So we've got a comparable figure.
Often qualitative analysis is much more difficult than quantitative, and we've got the quantitative stuff here, but yeah, a bit more of a deep dive there might be something for us as a council, or possibly as a committee going forward in the next administration. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Wells.
Yes, just really quickly, because obviously actually agree with much of what Michael says, but just to go over it again, I've had a number of parents contact me in surgery meetings where they are concerned about what this means for those going forward. So a couple of questions, and forgive me if these are already in here. And I know we're not allowed to harp about the past, but the reason I'm asking it is because some previous work that was done in Derby about 15 years ago. I'm just wondering if any work has done with regards to gender, with regards to are there more girls and boys that are home educated, would be especially when you're talking about the age range of which they go off role. So that I think that's a really pertinent question, and we need to really get to grips on that. That's one of the questions. The other question, that again, forgive me if it's already in there, in a caring capacity last night, so my mind's a bit this morning. With regards to how many of those are SEND, because every family that's come to me that has said that, and it may already be in there, sorry, every family that's come to me that is actually worried about what happens next with regards to this has been a parent with a child with special educational needs. So it's just where that concentration of work is going on with those, and maybe a bit of concentrated work now with those families that have got SEND, because some of them are feeling quite angry and quite upset about it all. And then just to say, with all the hat on, if we can help in any way, then please get in touch with us with regards to this. We'll happily be your boy as well and help with regards to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I think on the second question, so it does some of the statistics on S&D within the report, 62 children on EHCP in home educated currently. That obviously some of those will be waiting for special school places, and we'll talk a little bit later on perhaps about the work we're doing to create those places and to expand places. Ravensdale School in Mansfield additionally to come online at the end of this year, which we hope can help us to unpick some of those challenges as well, and a handful in the more kind of acute services in terms of child protection plans and things like that. Inevitably, and I think it's one of the things that's demonstrated in our kind of hopefully more inclusive approach around SEND is that actually a lot of the children where we offer that general support are not on EHCPs, so there will be a wider number in that space that perhaps haven't had the plan but might have additional needs in some capacity as well. But that is something that we do track and we can speak to the gender question. I don't have an answer to, officers may do.
So I thought we had gender on the dashboard, but I can't see it there. We will check in on that. But just to provide some reassurance, the Children Missing Education Board is a cross-departmental board that meets bi-monthly, and we're working through the dashboards on that. One of the things I met the data colleagues week before last, and we have CME and EHE and lots of different categories. The elective home education view, we've asked for that to be, where possible, sliced by gender, by area, by SEND status, looked after, youth justice, really key cohorts. So we're looking at all of our data through those cohorts to ask those questions, and therefore what needs to happen. So just, it's a bit of reassurance outside of just the elective home education team. There is a wider group of colleagues across children and family services, including social care colleagues and the virtual school, who are reviewing that data on this cohort in a bit more detail. And that happens bi-monthly.
I think if I may, Chair, just on that data question, both in terms of that ideological view question that Peter raised and Michael raised as well, just about examining our data, making sure we have answers to those questions that we would want to see, and just themselves, the point about help and from a parliamentary perspective, recognising all the economic and financial challenges. I think we touched on earlier on. Extra burdens, extra responsibilities will require extra resource from somewhere. And I think that, again, we'll come on to later in terms of SEND and other challenges, but we welcome the opportunity to get more involved with these families and parents, but it will need resources from somewhere.
Okay. Peter, did you want to come in again?
Yeah, it was just to say that in terms of support, if we're moving into a place where there's a legislated mechanism for recording elective home education, there's an opportunity there to get standardisation around the depth of knowledge and information which the local authority has and central government has ultimately, as we see in other areas. And we've got that within suspensions and exclusions, and sometimes the coding can be rather unhelpful. Persistent disruptive behaviour being one, but there's something around getting the nuance. So as that moves through from the wellbeing in schools bill into something that's physically rolled out, there's a real opportunity to get the right level of detail across those local area and others. I think to help us. They can.
Councillor Welsh mentioned children with SEND and the support for those. And obviously there is numbers in there for the children with education, health and care plans. And if children are coming out of school, we will be aware of the children with SEND who schools are supporting, coded as SEND-K. But there is a lot of conversation with parents bringing children out of school at the moment at times around whether SEND needs were recognised or met. So the statistics around children with SEND and EHE won't necessarily match what the parent group will tell you about children with SEND. So again, there's ongoing work to make sure children are receiving the appropriate curriculum for them if they are being electively home educated.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, it was just to add really, in terms of your offer to carry a message. I'm slightly off on a tangent, but I think if Nottinghamshire does have the advantage of having both of you actually making our case, not only is the case for greater funding to meet greater burdens now, but we're also going into local government reorganisation. And we know that a running theme for some of our funding streams has been we're stuck on like a historic model that means we've been underfunded compared to neighbours. But also, if we are, because we don't know what the LGR model will look like yet, but if we end up with disaggregated services because we've got two unitaries or something, just taking that conversation forward about, okay, are we parking the historic models now? And are we starting with a blank slate for all authority areas? And are we funding according to need and various other? So I think you've suggested you're already having that conversation, but that just strikes me as an area where you can be voices and can be helpful voices, please. Because there's the two parts to it. There's the money now and the money with what comes next.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bradley.
Very briefly, just to draw that out a little bit further. We know we have the data on this and other services across the board about where the need is. And we know, such as the nature of political decision making around things like boundaries, that the funding and revenue of the council tax doesn't necessarily match up with where the need is. And so it'll be particularly important, I think, as we go into that conversation to make sure the funding is based on the geographies of local authorities that have that need and not historic boundaries or measures of basic ones.
Really helpful.
Can I just say just one thing back? I'm really conscious of that, Ben, because that has been a long standing challenge for Nottinghamshire, because the affluent, when we use Adaki schools, for example, for funding, you know, even in Gedling, when you've got the Killissick area and etc., that kind of outbalances the other areas that are more affluent, and then Gedling doesn't end up, and you would have it challenges in all areas that we have. Newark and Shield is exactly the same. So I'm really conscious of that. I've already raised it directly, and so has Michael, with regards to Nottinghamshire in particular, as well as the whole of the East Midlands, but we have already, and we will continue to.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor James.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. My question's about the growing number of young people with mental health and anxiety issues who are being electively home educated, and the fact that often in schools, it's the schools who are pushing the support for those young people in terms of their educational health and well-being, but their mental health really, and getting them access to CAMS. That's often pushed significantly in schools. And I know it's very challenging, but is there a mechanism whereby those who are being electively home educated are still being supported and pushed, the parents, to access the mental health support for their children?
Thanks, James. Really pertinent question. I think one of the things that's touched on in the report, increasing numbers of those children remaining enrolled in schools, which I think is important, and being able to have those relationships and to build partnerships around it to support parents to access a wider set of services. Clearly, increases in mental health challenges, you know, reflected not just here or in this particular sector, but around the country, and particularly post-COVID, we've seen those really significant challenges, which is a pressure on our services and health services as well. And we know there are all sorts of backlogs, demand issues around mental health for young people more generally, but certainly in trying to develop those relationships, and hopefully some of them work through the bill as well, and the additional engagement, the additional tracking that might come with that can continue to help us push those people or advise those families around what services are available. I think there's also something here in the previous conversation about moving, and we tried to move across the course of this administration to a more place-based service, to a system where people who are home educated or people have all sorts of other needs and need to access services are aware of the family hubs, are aware of what's available in their area, have, you know, face-to-face contact with people from across our children's services system, as well as just the education piece, which I think, you know, we're working towards. It's a long journey to do, but I think the availability of those kinds of services should improve and increase, and has done over the course of the last few years as well.
Yeah. Just completely acknowledge the challenge. I think there's a number of parents and carers who will make that decision that my young person is anxious, been at home for a period of time a couple of years ago through COVID, they can work at home and I'll look after their education. We do have professional practitioners with families who want to have that interaction, and they can be a source of support. And also the work that we talked about in the policy around updating the website. There's a section in there for young people, and there's actually a bit about emotional well-being and mental health, which starts off by saying it's okay not to be okay, but we need to talk about it, and links young people into the Not Alone website, which is an all-age website around mental health, well-being, emotional well-being and support. So there's a real strong link there to the Not Alone work that Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire have jointly developing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Callaghan. No? Okay. I'd like to sum up, if I may, because I'm conscious of the remainder of the agenda, the time that we've got allocated. In terms of this committee, certainly in any committee that I chair, there's nothing that's not allowed as long as it's a constructive question and a constructive challenge. I've got no problem with us challenging, but the only thing that I ask for is that we challenge constructively, and we try to remain apolitical, and let's scrutinise, not politicise. In paragraph 20, we talk about the 141 children that could not be satisfied of a suitable education, and then down at the bottom of that paragraph, we talk about 25 children being referred for a school attendance order. Can I ask, I don't know if I've misinterpreted that, but what about the other 116? What's happening with them?
So the school attendance order process is only followed where the evidence is not satisfactory, according to the guidance which we've got, and that continues to be unsatisfactory, or there's not a voluntary return back into education.
Okay.
So if there's a continuing concern, it will go through a school attendance order process in order to enforce return to school. Some families, if the education then review the curriculum offer, address that and provide additional evidence, and therefore would be work with the local authority to return to school.
Okay.
Having to go through a school attendance order process. I think on the dashboard there were some higher numbers that show those returning to school. Off the top of my head, it's about 100 and something. I need to go and have a look, but it's certainly higher than 25.
Okay.
120.
Okay, thank you. So just before I move to Martin, what I will say to officers is not very often we sit in these select committees and have two members of parliament, and I appreciate the comments about offering their support where they can. But while they're here, grab them and tell them what you need. You know, just like I say to you with regard to members, to me, Vice Chairman, if you need something, tell us. You need something from these guys, tell them they're here to help. Okay, so Martin, can I ask you to give us a summary?
I think the biggest thing that's coming out is members really want to have that better understanding of those ideological and philosophical reasons. I don't know if I've said the right words, but at least the words I did say sounded okay to me. So I think it's just asking officers to do that bit of more digging, and if, I'm not sure if we can, because this may take a bit of time, but when available, it is shared with members once that kind of like increased learning. Obviously, members kind of feel if you have that kind of like that better help the delivery of the service as well.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm going to take a vote on these recommendations on page 31. All those for, show of hands, please. Thank you very much. And so, I'm going to move to agenda item number 7. I'm conscious that we still have 4 significant agenda items that we need to go through, and I just ask members to be cognizant of that. So, impact of the introduction of VAT on independent school fees. Again, I invite Councillor Ben Bradley, Cabinet Member for Education and SEND, to introduce the report. Councillor Bradley.
Thanks, Chair. A lot of work been done to look into this, back to this. It's fallen into a very political conversation about the rights and the wrongs of the national policy.
I'm not going to do that.
Have done that in the past and don't intend to do that today. Certainly do have a strong view on it. But having done through and worked through the numbers, which you can see on page 52 in the document pack, I think what is evidenced is there is potentially some risk here, although as yet we haven't seen a particular increase in the number of transfers from private to state education. I think, as the report demonstrates, or if you might sit into the mind of parents, it kind of remains to be seen in terms of what happens at the end of the academic year, and also in terms of what that long-term shift of particularly primary age students who might have considered independent education going into that question of cost in the coming years, whether this is more of a long-term shift away, which from a county council perspective is easier to manage in terms of school places. There are 6 independent schools in Nottinghamshire. It's quite challenging to map who goes where, because people will also inevitably attend schools across borders in other places as well. But what the report here demonstrates is, for the most part, across the range of school years, again in that table on page 52, it's not a significant challenge, I think, with the exception of academic years 7 and 9, where we don't have service spaces, and we know that. Although numbers may demonstrate significant service spaces, they're not always in the right places. But we do need to be aware and plan for potential that students in year 7, 8, and 9 in particular, a small number, would present a challenge in that those places currently to be found. But I think in general we haven't seen a shift yet in January in terms of significant changes in the number of people making that shift. We are planning for it. We are looking at what might need to be done, particularly, as I say, at the end of the academic year or moving into next year, to make that change.
Okay. Officers? Any comment?
The only thing I would add is that this is under constant review. We've got our admission service reporting back on regular regular points during the year, just with those numbers by district to make sure that we're tracking the trend so that we can react quickly if we see any shift in that.
Could I ask you to just expand a little on how are we reviewing constantly?
Yeah, so the admission service track where applications are coming from, where a child currently attending the school, record that, the district they're in, the applications being made. There's a chart on paragraph 26, which shows that over a number of years, and we've now got that reported into cabinet members on I think it's 3 times a year, on a termly basis.
Okay.
In terms of any shift, so that we can make sure we're having a proactive conversation about the implications of that, so the age range of those pupils and how that impacts on sufficiency in relation to the table on paragraph 22.
Okay, thank you. So I am going to make the recommendation on page 3 and seek a seconder. Thank you. So I'm now going to open to the floor for discussion and debate. Councillor Payne.
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, I mean, I think this is a really helpful report. I think it's helpful that it's kept under review. We're clearly still in early stages. I don't mean to be churlish about this, but I just think this is a lesson in not believing what you read in the papers and the hyperbole that I think we've seen around this policy. Clearly, anybody moving, from a school to another school has an impact on families. But I'm not being churlish about it. And there's reference here in Gedling to, I think, 10 moves from into the state education sector, from the independent sector this year. I have no idea what each individual reason is that sits behind those individual families, and clearly there's a disruption to those families of moving schools. But I do think this just sort of sets the record straight about some of that hyperbole we've seen in the press over recent months. But I think it's very, very helpful that there's a commitment by the County Council to keep this under close review, because I'm not naive to the fact that the transfers between the two sectors do have a impact. Thank you, Chair.
That's a fair point. I'm not sure there was a question in there.
No, there wasn't a question.
It's not. I'm not having a pop, Michael.
Just to respond to it, if I may, Chair, I'll make up a question to answer. I think it's fair to say that we haven't seen a significant change up to this point. Obviously, it's introduced in January, and it's impossible for us to get into the mind of parents in terms of what their process is around the cost of those fees and all the rest of it. So we have increased the level of kind of member involvement and engagement in the numbers. I think thinking through on a kind of, first of all, I'm trying to get into that conversation, that mindset. There was a question to me about, would you pull your child out in mid-year, or would it be at the end of an academic year? And I think the more likely to look to see in summer and over the course of the coming months as to whether that is an impact. But the other thing, as I think I mentioned in the opening conversation, is my expectation would be a more long-term shift in terms of decisions as to whether to. I think if you make that decision to pay the fees and to independently educate your child in the first place, you've made that decision. It's difficult to make that change without how disruptive it is, as Michael said, to children and families to change schools. Or can be midway through. So my expectation would be a shift in terms of the rules that come through. Now we know, obviously, particular school areas have particular pressures, particular school years have particular pressures. So we could see significant increases in some places and age groups, and it would be okay. Equally, we could see very small shifts in other places and age groups. 5 or 6 year 7s in Rushcliffe choose to shift into comprehensive education. That could cause us a significant challenge on those places. So we do need to keep abreast of that. We will do that and track that long-term trend as well. I think there is a risk, rather than that trickle of numbers, which if it happens over time is hopefully manageable. The risk, having visited a number of independent schools recently as a result of these national political conversations, is if the viability of a handful of schools, of a school, is challenged as a result. If an independent school, sometimes on very fine margins, finds it can no longer continue, then obviously that displaces a significant something we need to manage and as well.
Yeah, if I can just a really brief point, because Ben just speaking sort of like this. One thing that I think it would be really helpful for you, Ben, as a cabinet member and your officers to be laser focused on, the government's got a role here, is there clearly exemptions in the legislation around children with SEND, and I've met a couple of families in my constituency surgeries whose children were moved into the independent sector because of very complex SEND needs, who have anxieties about what they see as a blanket approach in the legislation. There are clearly provisions for safeguarding those children, but I think if there's an area where the council can be proactive and on the front foot, it's to be laser focused on those families in providing support and advocating for them. And I think there's also a role, by the way, for county councillors in the divisions and members of parliament to be advocating for those families to state schools, to independent schools, because I think there is a risk that because this has become such a heated debate nationally, there's some independent schools feel that they can get away with pulling a fast one over not providing the support and provision that is needed for those families. And actually, some of these independent schools, I accept not all of them, are sat on significant reserves and abilities to support families through a potential increase in price. And I think some of them are reluctant to act. So there's a role for the government here, and there's a role for MPs. This piece of legislation our government has introduced, but I would be very keen to work with the county council in being proactive in this particular area. You're going to talk later about the impact of children with SEND, but I think this is an area where the government, working with local authorities, can have a real impact and make a real difference to children who need that support.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Chair.
For that contribution.
Just start picking up on Ben's comment before Michael's last question. I think it's important as well to be aware in terms of tracking, something we've talked about with Peter, is, there's clearly been organic movement every year, so that's where the table shows a degree of consistency so far. But what Ben and Peter have talked about in terms of tracking is parents are likely to make those choices to change at key transfer points. So what we might find is that we get a bit of feast and flood, famine and flood in terms of when it happens. So we've seen the organic transfers over time anyway, but it could be that as children are hitting key transfer points in their education journey, that's when we see that parents might pull them out more, and that's all unknown, but we're sort of tracking that rationale at points in time to understand when parents make choice. Sometimes they'll just keep doing it until a natural point of change.
Thank you for that, Councillor Quigley.
Yeah, just a point. I think we're a bit early in the process to get anything out of these figures, but because I know the cut-off date was the 29th of July, but I know this has been rumoured for some considerable time, and a lot of people I know that had children in private education actually paid the fees up front before the 29th of July in anticipation it might happen. And I know a lot of us make financial decisions on the basis of what may happen. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. In this case, they're obviously right. Also, just a question, the figures that we're talking about on page 53, do they include all schools in the country, or is that just Nottinghamshire schools where the pupils have transferred? Because do we have the data for it's up for national? I don't suppose we do we?
Well, the
national figures.
The numbers on roll and knowing where they come from in the independent sector is something which we wouldn't hold. So we use data from the independent school census, and there's some contact with independent schools to ask postcode data. The numbers on the chart on paragraph 26 are all pupils applying into Nottinghamshire schools from any independent.
From any independent school. Yeah. It wasn't clear from the report whether there perhaps was. Yeah. Fine. But I think we'll know a little bit more in a year's time.
Okay, before I extend the debate further with Colin, Ben, and then I'm going to come to you, Michelle, I just want to make the point that when we raised this matter at our work programme, where myself, Councillor Perdue as Vice Chair, and Councillor Callaghan as the lead spokesperson within the Labour group, we discussed a number of topics, and this was one of them, and we were all agreed that this was something that needed to be brought, and that we needed to make sure that we were covering ourselves as a county council, and there was no political element to it, and I've made it very clear that this wasn't to be used in that way, but we were completely agreed across party that this was something that was important to bring to the committee, and that's what we've done. Colin, you raised your hand on the previous.
If I may, Chair, and it was just by way of reassurance to members around the room. Yeah, that apparent blip in Gedling, we absolutely know what that's about. Councillor Payne. Yeah, it was the failure of a very small independent provider that had nothing to do with VAT, but everything to do with parents and carers losing confidence in the standard of education. Yeah, and like any market, yeah, businesses will succeed and fail, yeah, grow and shrink. Yeah, and that describes that a little bit. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Ben?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think what that does demonstrate, as you say, we understand that, around the failure of a particular school. What that does demonstrate is if other schools were to fail, then it does cause that portion. There is that we need to try and manage. And just to Mike's particular point, I think you're right, Mike, and reflected in some of the conversations we've said in terms of people's decisions around when and if to change, equally financially. If people have paid for the year, they're not going to pull out in the middle of the year, are they? So, as I say, we hold that in review, and we keep having that conversation with officers and trying to manage the numbers so that we can manage that. And obviously, if we see or hear of any particular either financial challenges, or we see spikes in those numbers in particular places, and that's something we'll step in time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Welch.
Yeah, just firstly a question. So on page 52, table 1, it says 962. That's the number of pupils in Nottinghamshire that are in independent schools. Is that correct? 962 in total. Yeah.
Trying to find where you can show.
It's table 1 of the report.
Okay, yeah.
Middle number.
So there's 962 people in total across the whole of Nottinghamshire that are privately educated. In comparison even to Derby, that's quite low, isn't it? Quite a lot lower than Derby, quite a lot less, significantly lower than Lincoln and Lincolnshire.
Yeah, so I think I don't want to get this wrong, so correct me if I do. My understanding is that's the number of pupils in Nottinghamshire independent schools, or schools based in Nottinghamshire. Some of those pupils will not be from Nottinghamshire.
So that number of Nottinghamshire pupils might be greater, because some of them will go to school, the ones in Lincoln, for example.
Schools in other local authority areas.
Okay.
If you get a bus from Newark to a Lincoln school, or from Long Eaton to Repton, you're not on this table.
This is purely places in Nottinghamshire.
Sure.
But likewise, it could be from outside the council.
South Yorkshire going to and Derbyshire going to Worksop College. Yeah.
Very difficult to go because the data is not held.
Because of course you've got Nottingham High School that's right on the border, where I know a lot might go from Gedling to Nottingham High School and Boxing. Okay, that was just I just wanted to get the other question is, obviously I believe this is true, correct me if I'm wrong, you've had the applications in now for secondary school and primary school places. Is there anything there that's showing any difference? Because that would be a big decision place, wouldn't it? Because you're going to secondary school, has an impact in the September applications. Would be my other question. Are you able to see yet or not?
Good question. My instinct would be it's impossible to know who would have applied if I'd say it's difficult to get the mindset of parents. I think our data in terms of people accessing the right school places or whatever is consistent with last year. But yeah, we will never be able to know who might have applied for an independent school or might have gone there had policy not changed. It's difficult to know.
Yeah, I would just say that the number of families applying for a school place on time for National Offer Day was very similar to the previous year. So there's no significant shift in those numbers.
Right, okay.
Obviously, until you go through the applications and everything else, you balance that. We know that the population bulge is still coming through into secondary until about 2028, 2029. So, but there's certainly nothing that's indicating a shift in the data that we've seen so far.
Well, something I just wanted to highlight, Chair, in that table actually, and you can see slightly aside from the issue of independent schools, you can see the nature of that bulge through the school system. I think they're really helpful numbers to look at anyway. Many colleagues around the room will have conversations about things like building primary schools and Section 106 allocations and things like that. You can see very clearly from this table the challenge now and moving through schools is around year 7, 8 and 9 and continuing to move upwards into secondary education.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, are you happy with that?
No, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And So I'm going to ask Martin, do you have?
I think it's just something to keep an eye on. Obviously, we're doing the work programming sessions in June, and if this is something that members want to flag up there, and something they want to keep an eye on. But obviously, like I say, it is being reviewed, and I don't know whether it's something possible that could be put in the performance report, whether there's just like an extra kind of detail in there so that members can just keep their eye on it. It's just part of like the wider performance monitoring. Yeah.
I agree with that. I'm not sure it needs a separate agenda item. No. Before I ask members to give a show of hands on the recommendation, I just need to point out and apologise for asking Councillor Callaghan to second this motion, because you are technically an observer, as Anne's just pointed out to me. So I do apologise, and if I could ask someone else if they'd like to second the motion. Councillor Quigley. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So we have our recommendation on page 55. If you could take a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. That's us. And so we move to agenda item number 8, which is progress in improving the experiences and outcomes for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, and an update on that. Ladies, there's certainly Thank you, Karen.
And so that's one. No, that's
My car
it says 5 to 1.
My car every 6 months.
Yeah, I put it an hour forward just to
Just to frighten us.
Oh, I changed it now.
Okay, so let's I am conscious of the time, so let's move on, please. And please may I ask Colin Pettigrew, Corporate Director, Children and Families, to introduce the report.
Yes, thank you. Chair, I'm introducing the report, and in doing so, introducing 2 visitors to the Select Committee, which are Dame Christine Lenahan, as you know, who is the independent chair of the Senate Recruitment Board, and Dame Christine was travelling from London this morning to go speak at this committee, and then to form them with an independent view. The other person is my Chief Nurse Rosa Waddingham. Rosa and I are the 2 leaders of the SEND system within Nottinghamshire. And Rosa is 2 here to be able to speak to both the system as a whole.
Okay, thank you very much. First, Rosa, I'm going to ask you.
Oh, my apologies.
Oh,
yeah.
I can't see that.
As Councillor Taylor has just indicated to me, I will hear about this later.
rightly so.
And rightly so. And the third colleague is Georgina Palmer. Georgina represents the Nottinghamshire Parent and Carer Forum, and is we do not have meetings at all at any level on special educational needs and disabilities without having the parent carer voice in the room.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I hadn't spotted. Georgina had come to the table, so apologies.
All 3 of you welcome, and Georgina, I think he owes you lunch. Rosa, please may I ask you if you would like to contribute, please?
Yes, so if Colin might always do this as a double act. So if I start in the areas I missed, I'm sure I'll be audible. So colleagues will know this is an area of improvement we've worked collectively on for the last few years, and have had independently overseen improvement boards that Dame Christine has chaired. We have seen both a significant increase in demand on our services during that 2-year period, but also an increase in our performance in many areas. Clearly, there's still work to do, and there are a number of areas where we're not doing as much as we would like to do, and where waiting times, especially in relation to some of the health services, are not where we want them to be. And we we've worked with partners to think about how we support children, young people and their families during those waiting times. And one of the biggest improvements, I think, and Georgina's probably more able to comment on than I, is the improved relationship we have with children, young people and their families. We send their voices in our improvement. And actually, when we look at the original actions that were set to us by the inspection, a lot of that was around our understanding of partnership working, our ability to understand and act on our data, including feedback from parents and carers and children and young people. And in that, we have made huge steps forward. And you'll see towards the end of the report, information on the shared commissioning strategy. So we have a single strategy to commission services, which is a huge step forward. But also the number of regular engagement sessions and working groups that we have has significantly increased, along with, Dame Christine will kick me under the table, but the best shorthand is a waiting well approach that sort of says, well, how, if the waiting lists are where they are, how do we most actively support children and families during those waiting times? Yeah. And in line with what Councillor Bradley talked about earlier, how do we make sure that we support people waiting for a diagnosis to have a needs-led approach to meeting their need in school or at home or in community, which is far, far more important often than getting a diagnosis of autism or even an EHCP. So that graduated response and how we support children, families and young people continues to be a real focus of work across both health, education and all of our partners over the last few years.
Okay, Rosa, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that. That insight is much appreciated. If I may, interesting. Thank you again for coming to join us. It's really appreciated. And I'd just love to ask you if you have anything you'd like to add, and if you could please share a little bit more maybe of in terms of a national context to what we're doing as well.
Yeah, so it's full declaration. I chair 3 improvement boards including Nottinghamshire, and I'm October last year I was appointed by the Secretary of State for Education as a strategic advisor on SIN for the Department for Education. And that's been really, really helpful to use what's happened locally and take that nationally. There's something about working locally and understanding the space to act that's been really important. I think after 2 years in Nottinghamshire, the things that have been really important are the strength of the partnership. I don't think there is any doubt at all about the commitment of the ICB to this partnership. I think Rosa has led that and championed that. And I've been fortunate to have regular meetings with the Chief Executive of the local authority and the Chief Executive of the ICB. So if we have got stuck, if we're trying to work that out, I think there's an understanding of the sort of 3 things, I think, at the moment that we're working with. The first is the context of rising demand. So almost like running on a hamster wheel. So understanding what full is in the system, what does full look like, what should we be attaining for. I think the second thing has been resource issues across the system and what's possible and what isn't. There's no magic unicorn tree. It's not there, it's what we do. And the third, I think, has been a very uncertain national context. The people wondering about, are we fixing a system that's about to change? What's been really helpful in Nottinghamshire is the strength of the partnership has been the engagement of schools. We had a really good time a couple of weeks ago. We spent the morning at St Giles School in Retford, and we looked at the sort of range of children that now occupy our special education, children who maybe should be in mainstream schools with support, children actually who are waiting for independent non-maintained placements because their needs are so severe and personalised that they need something else. But actually a real approach in that school to citizenship. And we've had good schools representation on it. We've been into mainstream schools, we've looked. So I think the partnership is strong. I think Nottinghamshire is in an odd position. There are 4 local areas trapped in this position. It is not their fault, it is the fault of the system that's not working. So because Ofsted have paused all their monitoring inspections for area send inspections, it means that Nottinghamshire by now should have been inspected. We should have had a progress inspection at 18 months to look at how far we've got and to have independent verification of the progress we've made. Because those inspections are paused, we have not yet had that. So what we have been able to achieve with an incredible amount of hard work from across the system, and you've already recognised this morning just how lucky you are to have so many members of the authority who work hard in terms of officers, is to get to a point where I think our areas for improvement, as Rosa pointed out, are completed. There are some things that remain as national challenges. We are not going to get to 100% of children with EHCPs on time. We are not going to get to a point where there are no waiting lists or significant health services. Those things are, but we have completed inspection today. And so at the moment, we're looking at what are the gaps are that takes us into a sustainability programme and business as usual. So we've been looking with Nottinghamshire, for example, how to improve quality assurance across the piece, and the piece of work we're doing on that. Across that, we've been looking at the continuing strengthening relationships with parent carers. I need to pay tribute to Georgina, who has been with us at every single point on this stage and has worked really hard to ensure that we bring parents along, that we understand, even though in any system, and particularly in the system of SEND, we will never, ever be in a position where everyone's happy. That's just not how this world works. But in terms of bringing people along, and we had a new member who joined us at St Giles, which was really helpful. So that's the sort of where we are. In terms of nationally, I have been working with governments on SEND for the last 30 years. For about the last 10, probably since the Children and Families Act came in, government has been looking at how to improve the system. Over the last 2 or 3 years, the system has become increasingly financially unsustainable and increasingly litigious and angry. Where we are at the moment is a system that financially is bankrupt, really, and a system where children's outcomes are not being met in the way that you want them to meet. That does not mean there are not children in schools and families getting their outcomes met every day. There is, but there's not enough of it, and it's not consistent enough. So this government has committed to ministerial reform on SEND. You'll have heard the Secretary of State a number of times talk about reform. The honest answer at the moment is ministers have now got to decide how brave they want to be. Anything about reform in this area is a bit like the blue touch paper and retire. It'll go bang. And it'll go bang because we're in a system where we need to be really, really clear what the offer of the state is to parents. We need to be really, really clear what we can offer to whom and how and what that looks like. And that will mean a change in entitlements. It'll mean a change in the system. We need to be really clear what our expectations are of schools. We need schools to be inclusive places. We cannot have a system we have at the moment where we've got some brilliant inclusive schools and some schools that say we don't take children like that. So we need to be really clear about inclusive schools. We need to be really clear about the offer of the state to the parent. And we need to be really clear what our vision is for the very best outcome for children. Those questions are difficult and challenging. They're occupying a fair amount of ministerial time at a time when, as you all know, lots of other things are happening in terms of what's going on. But I am taking my knowledge from Nottinghamshire and my understanding of Nottinghamshire into that debate. We have an expectation of announcements on reform sooner rather than later. Part of my job as the Improvement Board Chair is to make sure Nottinghamshire is in the best position, as you were talking about with the Children Wellbeing in Schools Bill, Ben, to be in the best position to be on the front foot for any reforms coming through.
Okay, thank you very much, Dame. Christine, I'm going to do. So before I move on to Councillor Bradley, Georgina, would you like to add anything to the discussion now, please?
I guess, I mean, Dame Christine has said it very, very clearly. I think that something that I find when we're going around with the forum, and we've been involved in a piece of work this year, which, good news, it's actually going to continue next year, which is a national project that's been fully funded from the DFE and NHS England. Well, whatever. For now, yes, absolutely. Which is basically a project aiming to improve the outcomes for neurodivergent children in mainstream settings in their primaries. schools, bringing together partnership working again. And that includes partnership working between parents and carers and their school to help shape the whole school SEND provision and better meet the needs of those children at their mainstream schools. I think there is an absolute need for all schools to be better at including the children within their locality, a greater cohort of those children. And some schools are doing it brilliantly and some schools not so well. And actually some of the ways of doing that better aren't just about money. They are very much about working with parents on, you know, agreed goals, on communicating with them. And so, you know, those are easy wins, it seems to me, that can be done. And we're hearing that more and more when we're out with parents, meeting in those groups, is that, you know, one school down the road will be doing this really well, and the culture will be a culture of inclusivity. And then you may have a school down the road who really are saying, shouldn't these children be in special schools? And when we go out to special schools and see who their cohort is, it's quite clearly a no. They shouldn't. They should be included in the schools.
Okay, Georgina, thank you very much, and thanks for coming to the committee. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. From my perspective, obviously been involved at a high level in my previous guise as leader of the council in terms of implementing the origins of the improvement plan and trying to develop this structure for improvement. And then just recently, since December, as a cabinet member and privileged to attend a couple of the improvement board meetings, which have been really eye-opening and interesting. I think a couple of reflections that I would make. I think the first is that national context and the real challenge of the legislation. You know, again, previous life sat on the Education Select Committee inquiry in 2018 into that system and structure and making the recommendations then to government that haven't been addressed. And true, it's an incredibly difficult thing to tackle, but I think it's important to recognise what then Christine said in terms of, you know, the areas that we can improve and build on and get processes and policies right, implementation right on a local level that will not make the system perfect. It will not make it work for all families in the context of the current system and structures. 2014 Act, well intended as I think it was, created a disparity between what is available and what is expected, rightly or wrongly. And that is what needs to be addressed ultimately for us to get this right properly. But what I have seen over the course of that period, through the hard work, as again has been reflected in previous comments by all sorts of people independently across the partnership and within the council, is a real commitment and a real improvement in terms of the partnership, in terms of the accountability of that, the oversight, the way that collaboration works together. I think it's reflected in all of those conversations that I've been part of in the improvement board with everybody within that system, and feels that the system at that high level operates far better than it did 2 or 3 years ago. That's not to say, and I think Dave Christine points out, you know, the inspection points, improvement points are complete. That's not to say that has filtered down all the way through the system and that all parents therefore have a fantastic experience. There's a long way to go to get there. I think the point to recognise is that where, on a governance level, on a process level, on a policy level, we were criticised 2 years ago, we understand that far better. Improvement plans are in place that are coherent and understood, and that shared understanding across the system. And in various places, data within the report, that improvement is recognised within the data and recognised within, I think, the experience of that parental engagement in the system as far as is possible, because clearly, again, you cannot engage day to day with every parent within the system. But I've certainly recognised that improvement in terms of culture and collaboration across the board. I'd reflect that we are behind in terms of that inspection framework, that timeline. We've had a stock take, as it's called, which sounds to have been a positive conversation in terms of our feedback to government. We don't get an outcome from that. We get lots of, you told us that these things are better than they were before. It would be great, in my view, to have some more feedback from government. There's a question about whether we need to go through both a monitoring report and then an inspection, which should all now be due within a very tight period of time, or whether to some extent we can get on with it and just have that inspection. I think we have some confidence, as I say, that on a leadership level, on a collaboration and partnership level, those services and those questions have been answered to a large extent. Again, reflecting the fact that that does not immediately and will not completely trickle down to the experience of families on a day-to-day basis. But I would ask, and inevitably we'll come on to the point of, particularly parliamentary colleagues in the room, what can we take away and what can we ask of government? I would ask for some clarity and for some improvement, acceleration of that approach in terms of our engagement and our monitoring and inspection from government. And the final point, just on finances again, which is reflected in here, we have had an increase in high needs block funding for next year. That increase covers what is in our gap this year, but does not cover the inevitable inflationary cost, the demand cost, and additional resource need that will be there next year. So we're going to be back in the same position again. I would have thought when we come to budget next year, saying yes, it has gone up, but not as fast as demand, and there will continue to be that resource challenge in the system. But I would just, and I said this at the last meeting, which I'm not standing again, was my last. I am incredibly grateful, given, I think we were all understandably frustrated, upset at the outcome of the inspection several years ago. The way that partners, the way that the partnership board and everybody involved in that, officers within the council, have come together around that and use that as a real catalyst to drive improvement and change has been fantastic to see. With all the caveats that we've discussed many times, I think it's been a fantastic process. Grateful to Dame Christine for her leadership of that. And the challenge for us now is how do you transition then to build that into not having to be a special improvement board, but to being our day-to-day practice. And this is how we manage this system in a better way than we did before.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Are there any comments from the officers or I move the recommendations? No. Okay, so thank you. I'd like to move the recommendations that are on page 67. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Anne. And I'm now going to open to the floor for debate. And Councillor Payne, you've indicated you'd like to speak.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to begin by echoing a few things that Ben said as the cabinet member. First of all, to thank Dame Christine for the leadership you've shown, Christine, in what is probably one of the most important pieces of work that the County Council has been doing over the last few years. I mean, we all get in our post bag, I think, people writing to us about potholes and roads, which is clearly a source of frustration, but this is the biggest issue I get written to about as a member of Parliament, and it's clearly the one that touches most impactfully on people's lives. So I'm very grateful for the work you've done. And I should also say specifically a thank you to Colin and to Rosa. Colin has always been there to pick up the phone when I've had incredibly complex or difficult issues that have been raised by constituents in this area of work. And that speedy response, that sort of comprehensive and compassionate response, I think makes a real difference. The structural change is absolutely critical, but also having officers who can respond and genuinely understand the impact on families really matters. And I know there are a few families who have been very, very grateful for the way in which Colin and colleagues have personally reached out where there have been difficult cases. I think my biggest thanks goes to Georgina and the hundreds of parents who stand behind you, Georgina, in the work that you're doing, because I think the point I'd make is this, and I don't mean to be churlish in saying this, notwithstanding the brilliant improvement that there clearly has been, and I think you elucidated it better than I could, Dame Christine, this system still does clearly not command the confidence of parents and families, not just here in Nottinghamshire. I'm not in any way making a critical point about Nottinghamshire here, but also nationally. Like Ben, I sat in the Public Accounts Committee and I pushed for our first inquiry to be about not just the cost of policy delivery around SEND, and I was struck by some of what came out in the evidence from parents, from practitioners, from civil servants, permanent secretaries in the respective departments who you work much closer with than I've had the opportunity to, Christine. But 1.9 million children across the country now with SEND between the age of 0 and 25, 40,000 children across the country waiting more than 12 weeks for speech and language therapies, which can be life inhibiting issues if they don't receive the appropriate support. And as Ben rightly says, and I think he's right to touch on this, and it does need cross-party consensus, a risk that if something is not done by ministers about this, a potential £4.6 billion deficit for local authorities by March next year, and that clearly will balloon throughout the life of this year if there isn't something done, notwithstanding the additional money that came in terms of high needs this year. I think a few things that really concern me, and I don't say these to be critical, but I think it's right, and I think you said, Christine, at the start, we have to continue to challenge ourselves on this. Nationally, and the figures are in here, but they were borne out in our inquiry, 50% just over of EHC is now dealt with on time across the country. Massive strides made in Nottinghamshire. It would be wrong not to accept that, but we're still 15% adrift from where the national picture is. Now, I recognise the national picture is made up of different areas that will have really poor performance and good performance, which affects the overall average figure. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves in saying that we are still adrift, notwithstanding the fact that I recognise there is a problem, I think, more broadly with the EHC system. Ben touched on it in its introduction, but it does mean that some children and some families are not getting even the assessment or support that they need in the time that is suitable. And the other thing that just really worries me, notwithstanding the clear intention in this report to bring this down, is in terms of the neurodevelopmental issues, Rosa, which you touched on, 279 children, and I've spoken to some of these families waiting 104 weeks. I mean, that is very significant for children who need additional support. And I recognise the stated aim here of trying to get it down to basically a year's wait. And I recognise, Rosa, what you've said about the support whilst people are waiting, which I think is to be welcomed. But I'm very struck and would be willing to pick up a conversation after this meeting with yourself, Ben, Christine, perhaps Ben as Cabinet Member, and Colin, because I think go back full circle to where I started, Chair, on this point about confidence of families. I do now think that there needs to be some sort of independent verification about the journey that we've been on since that original Ofsted report. And I accept your challenge back, Christine, about the issue around Ofsted and monitoring. But I think if we are to command the confidence of parents and families, they have to know that this is not just us saying, well, he would say this, of course, wouldn't you? And I include myself in this as a fellow corporate parent, at least until May, when I stand down as a county councillor. But I think they genuinely need to see that this isn't just the system saying this. Georgina clearly and her colleagues have been providing really, effective scrutiny and accountability, but they need independently to see that this is going in the right direction, that the journey is going in the right direction. And the final point I just make is this, Chair, that you have my word and Michelle's, and actually I speak for colleagues who are parliamentarians across Nottingham and Nottinghamshire cross-party on this, because I've spoken to colleagues cross-party on this issue, that we will continue to do what we can to support the work that you're doing here to make sure that you're getting the resource nationally, but also that ministers, I think, as you said, Christine, are brave on this, because I think if we're not brave on this in a cross-party fashion nationally, we are letting down people like Georgina and the hundreds of parents who stand behind her and the children. But I think, really good work, and notwithstanding some of the challenges I've raised and the questions that I've raised, it would be churlish not to acknowledge that there has been good work that's gone on. And I really do think this is probably the most important thing the County Council has been doing in recent years. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Michael, that's a very valuable contribution. Councillor Bradley.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Michael, for that and the manner in which it was delivered. I think the number of points in there, particularly around national changes that we've discussed and can continue to discuss, I think we're in particular probably be more qualified than me to talk about health waiting times and other things. But I wanted to pick up on 2 points. One, the independent verification point that you just made, and reflects the conversation that we had at the last improvement board about wanting to see that. I think we all recognise, and as I said earlier on, that although the system, the process, the governance is vastly improved, and I think we would all say a far cry from where it was 2 years ago. That's not immediately reflected in every parent's experience of the system, and it is just us saying that, isn't it? So we have said the same, and I intend actually to write next week to ministers to ask for that clarification on timeframes, and actually do we have to have that monitoring bit that should have happened already. Can we have done our inspection? Can we have that verified, hopefully for better? And to kind of move beyond that label of, failing system. We don't think we are there anymore, and we would like to see that reflected in the kind of independent narrative as well as our own. But on the HCP point, it's absolutely right. I think clearly 50% nationally. I think the fact that it is 50% nationally when it's a statutory requirement demonstrates the challenge of actually getting that delivered. Only half of it actually happens. We're at 34. I just reflect, and you mentioned it at the start of this administration, we were at 4. And that 34 is in the context of nearly a 25% increase in demand over the same period of time. So it's been a huge piece of work to try and mitigate that, to try and improve and increase that, recognising we're still a long way off where ideally we would like to be. But to Rose's point previously, there's also something in there about the work in terms of inclusivity and with schools to make sure that children who are waiting for those assessments are getting day-to-day support in the meantime.
Okay, Rosa.
So, and also this, just for context, this is about the 2 improvement priorities. So we have a huge strategy, a co-produced strategy with a whole set of benchmarks and a dashboard. So we've come to you today to talk about the 2 areas for priority action, not the whole of our journey, not the whole of our ambition, not the whole of our intent. And in that, we're really clear that we, like you, those waiting times are not where we would want them to be. But what we need to do is stop focusing on the 2 things that were really important 2 years ago, that were around us in health, not really even knowing our data, not really understanding our waiting times, not understanding that, not understanding who was on the waiting list. And when we were asked by the inspectorate how long people were waiting, we couldn't tell them. So that's the position we were in when we were inspected. And now I can come to you and I can tell you that even though these figures are awful, we're some of the best performing across the Midlands. It doesn't give me any pride to say that, because this is where we could be. I can sit before you and say, I know in the last 4 years that our referrals to the neurodevelopmental pathway have increased by 100 referrals a month. So there are 100 more children and young people being referred into that pathway every month now than there were. I didn't know that 2 years ago. So the priority action area, I would agree with Christine, we've made significant changes, if not got to resolving that. Have we resolved the issues with the neurodevelopmental pathway for children and people? No. Do we absolutely know the majority of those children and people are assessed and they are triaged and they're put into that pathway appropriately within a month? Yes, they are. Do we know that those children are contacted through those pathways to check that they're having the support and to escalate and re-triage as needed? Yes, we do. Again, we didn't know that 2 years ago. Is it still right that children and young people should wait that long for an assessment? No. So I think I would absolutely agree, and our sense of improvement doesn't reflect a sense of acceptance of that position of being right. But I think what we are confident now, in a way that we weren't, that actually wait times for a referral, screening and triage originally were 12 months. So it was 12 months before somebody spoke to you to say, how urgent is this referral? They're now a week. So there have been some huge areas of improvement within those headline numbers that I think it is worth.
Okay, Rosa, thank you very much. Michael?
No, I accept your point, Rosa, and you're right to point out that this is about 2 areas for improvement. I guess I'd just gently say that, having looked closely at this, you're far closer to this as a practitioner than I am. The system is so interactive with each individual part, and actually if you don't solve the system, it's a challenge back to me and others as much as it's a challenge back to the local authority. It's very difficult to make the significant strides you need to make in improvement areas. And I do recognise, Rosa, the good work that's taking place in what is not a very difficult, not an easy area to make progress in. And funding is a challenge, isn't it? Having the right staff is a challenge. The complexities of the cases are a challenge. The system isn't particularly working. The policy shift has not been helpful. But yeah, I'm very, very grateful, Chair, for the response.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. And if I could respond to that point, first of all, saying it's worth reminding ourselves that round about a third of local authorities were in something called the safety valve because their overspend on high needs block was so eye-watering. Yeah, and Peter, I'm just going to ask you to remind us of places like Surrey, Kent, Essex's, yeah, or was it Gloucestershire? I can't remember, but it was over £200 million worth of overspend. Yeah. Another third were in delivering better value, yeah, and Nottinghamshire were in that final third. Yeah. But we are seeing the heat in that high needs block. The second bit I was going to make was that high needs block is for meeting the needs of children once their needs have been assessed. Yeah. And what we haven't seen, and that has been increased enormously, but what we haven't seen is a significant increase in supporting getting those assessments done in the first place. Yeah. I think I can confidently say from the work that I've observed both locally, regionally and nationally, yeah, that the local system between Nottinghamshire County Council and Nottinghamshire ICB, yeah, is far closer than what we're seeing in the national system between the Department of Health and Social Care, was NHS England, yeah, and indeed the Department for Education. Yeah. And there is a challenge, I think, Michael and Michelle, around that joint, and I know central government is determined to take mission approaches to cross-departmental priorities, yeah, but that we haven't seen that today.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Councillor Welch.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for all of the great work that has happened so far. I'm probably going to rock the little boat a bit and be quite open and transparent about how I feel, and that won't come as a shock to people, because that is how I feel with regards to special educational needs and other things in relation to that, coming from that background. It still doesn't sit quite right with me, and I'll be really open about this, that 2 years ago, only 2 years ago, you didn't know that information. It still does not sit right with me. And I know we're not allowed to go back to the past, and Councillor Tracy Taylor doesn't like that. But I'm saying...
Just a point of order. We've already made clear that there's no problem in talking about historical matters, as long as they're constructive. No problem with challenge, Councillor Welch,
so
as long as they're structured.
Yes, so I think what also needs to happen in all of the things that we do, that we're talking about in health and education, is making sure that those places, those things are in place, that actually we don't get to a point where an ICB is being like that. So that's really important. And it's important for a number of things in relation to the ICB, which I won't go on to any more detail, but it's my own experience. So I'll stop there before I go any further. I'd just like to also, Michael's highlighted it, the 279 children. I won't go into any more detail on that, but Michael has already highlighted that. We've already discussed it. I'd just like to go on to, as someone who's really close to the Department for Education department in Parliament on a number of levels, I would like to reassure you that Bridget Phillips and the Labour government are not shying away from making some very, very radical decisions with regards to special educational needs. Very radical decisions. It is recognised that it cannot go on the way it is going on, and those meetings are, Colin, are cross-departmental with health behind the scenes at the moment. That is what is happening. They are not making these decisions individually. They are meeting with regards to across the board. That is happening, and we are being briefed across the board as well. My own personal view. This is my own personal view, not the government that I represent, but I think EHCPs are not fit for purpose. I don't think they do the job, and I don't think they actually deliver what they need to do at all. That's my own personal opinion over years of working with them. That's notwithstanding, though, I do think that an enormous amount of work, and if you'd have told me 2 years ago that we would be at this point now, I would have been absolutely over the moon, because there has been a huge progress. But your progress going forward, I am very conscious of the fact, is also partly, if not mainly, to do with what happens nationally. And I'm conscious of that too. And just to go back with regards to the independent verification, I have already written a letter to the Minister about 3 weeks ago with regards to what is happening with regards to to Nottinghamshire. I haven't had a response yet, but I'll chase that response, and when I get that response, I will share that with you.
Okay, thank you. Then Christine.
Yeah,
If you want to come back.
a couple of bits. That's really, really helpful. I think the first thing that I remember the first meeting that Rosa and I ever had. It was very lively. And it was lively because we were trying to get hold of data that wasn't generally existing, that wasn't there, whatever, not just in Nottinghamshire, but nationally. And one of the things that we've done in the last 2 years is really, really worked hard to answer the questions of who and why and where and whatever. And what we've been able to do with that learning in Nottinghamshire, and it's because health is such a complicated place, it's what providers are doing, what system, what part of what system's doing. And I remember coming into Nottinghamshire and having the first conversation with Councillor Taylor, who said, and don't forget Bassett Law. Thinking, right, don't forget Bassett Law. I didn't know where Bassett Law was, but don't forget Bassett Law. I do now, definitely. But trying to do that. So what we've tried to do over the last 2 years, and we brought in, the breakthrough, I have to tell you, was to bring in a fantastic man who's a data analytics expert, because I am not. And he works for the ICB. And so what we've been able to do is to put that data together in enormous detail to a point where we're now using that as national good practice. So what we've done nationally is we've brought together 2 task groups. One is national good practice on data, and it's going over what we need is a unique national identifier. We've needed it for 20 years, but you go on and put your hand up on that, would be good. But what we've been looking at is that what does health tell us about what's happening in the local authority in education, in schools, in the system? What does the local authority tell us? And how do you push these very complex systems together? And how do you work through the minefield of information sharing and get to where you need to go? So we can be really clear. Are these children the same children as those children? Do we know what they're waiting for? Do we know what it looks like? And when can we intervene? So that has been a massive piece of work that we started in Nottinghamshire, but we've taken nationally. And the results of that are fairly clear and should be with us. And the other thing we've done is look to what quality is in the system. How do we measure it? What does it feel like? What should it do? So we've had to take on some quite big system challenges to try and answer some local challenges. I also know that there is cross-government work on this. It is absolutely clear that we will not, that SEND is not the DFE's responsibility. It is the responsibility of a collective government act, whether that's about NHS England and DHSC, whether it's about the Ministry of Justice, if we think about where young people end up in the system, whether it's about housing and local government. So we do know that there is a cross-ministerial agreement, and that's really, really helpful. I think where we are now at the stage, it's difficult, isn't it? Because we were at the stage where everything in the public sector all needs attention at once. But we are at a point where we will need to have to announce, as you say, some fairly radical stuff. And Michelle, what I'd ask you, and I will back you every step of the way, is that we support governments to actually announce those radical things. And I will work every step of the way to implement them, because in the end, that's how children's outcomes will get better.
Okay, thank you, Dame Christine. Okay, what's clear is that there are some fair and reasonable challenges, on where we've been. But I think that there's the round the table recognition of the fantastic work that we've done to move things forward. Councillor Taylor, you want a quick comment?
Yeah, just an observation. I suppose a little bit political, but I hope for the best of reasons, and I hope that we receive that way. It's picking up on what Michael said and others have commented on and echoed about parental confidence in the system and in what's going on in Nottinghamshire. And you said you're stepping down at the elections. Some people will be stepping down, some of us are standing, some of us will survive, some of us will not. My ask of those of us who are involved in politics and these elections is that insofar as we may have a voice within our local organisations, that we seek to have SEND not used as a political football and campaign tool. Because if we are honest, and having discussed this as we have today and on numerous other occasions, whoever is still standing after the 1st of May will face exactly the challenges that we're talking about now. And it won't matter if you're blue, red, polka dot, striped or anything else. So if we have a voice, I suppose it's a personal plea to the politicians in the room to try and calm down that narrative as we go into the election campaign, because the people who will suffer the most are not the prospective candidates, it's the children and families of Nottinghamshire whose SEND needs are still to be met in the best way. So a slightly ideological, possibly naive plea, but if we have a voice, can we please just take a little bit of the heat out of this as a political football? Because the problems will remain, the challenges remain. We know, as Dame Christine said, that government has got a really big task to do, a poison chalice, if we're honest. Yeah. And so, you know, we need support with that. Otherwise, it's ultimately the children and families of Nottinghamshire that pay. So, sorry, soapbox moment over, Chair.
No problem.
Chair, just on that point, Chair, if I may, just on that point, because I think it's a powerful point that Tracy made. I think the travesty, Tracy, is it's already happening. And there are, you know, I don't want to sort of prolong this, but there are colleagues who are not in this room who I think are already using not just this issue but other issues to open up divisions in society, and I find that deeply concerning.
Yeah.
And I'm not standing in the election, so I'm not seeking to make a partisan point about this. I don't have a vested interest in this, other than that I do care about the system being fixed. But I think the travesty is that there are already political forces in the country and here in Nottinghamshire are using this issue as a wedge and a divisive issue, which I think you're right, Tracy, does a huge disservice to Georgina and the hundreds of families across the county who sit behind her and the children. So I think it is a salutary reminder, Tracy, but I think it's very sad because I think it's already happening.
And I would agree with you.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. That's a very valid point. Thank you, Councillor. Tell you what, I'm going to move the recommendations on page. I'm going to ask for a vote on the recommendations. Before that, I'm going to ask Martin if you've got any comments you need to give. Make us aware of that you were captured. And
no, that was no, it was just obviously we've had a really round discussion, and obviously it's for the chairman to do the thanks, but I'd like to say thanks to Dame Christine for attending, and I think obviously whoever is sat next to me in wherever room we're sat in for the next meeting and meetings coming.
That's if you're still in.
That's if I'm still in. I think it would be really useful. I think it'd be really useful if you'd be happy to come to a future meeting. Because I think, from my point of view as senior scrutiny officer, I think having you here at this meeting and the previous meeting, I think you've really kind of like kicked the discussion forward. You've like moved on to another level, and I think from a scrutiny level, the discussion we've had today, I think has been absolutely fantastic. So. I think everyone's made a really valid point, so I think that would be my summary. So if you are able to attend sometime in the new administration, that would be that'd be fantastic.
Of course, I'd be happy to.
Okay. Thank you, Martin, and I'm sure you'll be here with all our other fantastic officers. So I'm going to move to vote the recommendation on page, I think it's 67. I'm going to have a show of hands. Thank you all very much. And I'm conscious of the time. I'm conscious that, are we okay to move straight on? Those who need to leave, please don't feel that you need to stay. And Christine, you're more than welcome to stay for the duration. We've got more agenda items, which shouldn't be too long, but...
Forgive me, Mr. Chairman, I've got a dash.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Francis. Okay, so agenda item 9, children and families, departmental performance, risks and financial position, 4 to 3. May I say that we have this discussion at every meeting. I'm not intending this to be a protracted agenda item because we still have one very important item still left to discuss where some good work's been done. Okay, so I am going to invite Councillors Tracy Taylor and Ben Bradley to introduce the report in whichever order you'd like to speak. Councillor.
I think our agreed position was that we were going to invite Colin as our officer to lead on this. This is a shared report.
Colin, I would gladly have you.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, as you rightly point out, this is a standard report that comes once every quarter. Yep. This is the end of quarter 3. It's almost a report for information, but I don't want to deny the opportunity to scrutinise any data that's in there. The report's in 3 parts. It covers our key performance indicators, our highest risk, and then finally the financial position of the department at the end of period 9, which is the end of period 3. It was a £4.4 million forecast overspend. That's just over 2% of the £200 million budget. But that and interestingly almost segues into the next agenda item. That £4.4 million it includes a £7.5 million overspend on looked after children's costs. That's partly due to our being at the behest of the market, and the not having enough internal foster carers, which is what you've looked at in the next agenda item. If you were to ask me, how are we going to address this, in one of the answers, that would be a silver bullet, would be we need to increase our internal foster care provision. Because we need to avoid going to the market who are holding us I'll pause there if I may. I'll take any questions, Chair. And I've got colleagues in the room who can help us with that. But I suspect the committee is keen to get on to the piece of work that they've produced with regards to the fostering review.
Okay, Owen, thank you very much. So I am going to move the recommendations on page 76 and ask for a seconder. So quickly, thank you very much. And so I am now going to open the floor for debate and discussion. No? Okay, right, we'll move on quickly. Martin, do you have any summary points that you'd like to read out?
I don't actually on this, no.
So can I take a vote on the recommendation on page 76 with a show of hands, please? Thank you very much. Carried, and we can move on to agenda item number 10. So outcomes of scrutiny review. For fostering recruitment and retention. And I will introduce the report once I get to the appropriate page in the agenda pack and my notes. So I'd like to introduce the report, and I'd like to say that it's been an absolute privilege to chair this committee and also this task and finish review that worked positively across all groups on such an important topic. Council's fostering service has in recent years been facing significant challenges in recruitment and retention of foster carers, which has led to the increased use of independent fostering agencies and residential care home placements for our looked after children. This report shares the findings from the task and finish review that was carried out to examine how the council is working to increase the number of in-house foster carers to care for our looked after children and to consider what further activity could be carried out to support this work. The review carried out by members from all groups sought to understand the current challenges being faced by the council in recruiting and retaining foster carers in order to make a set of recommendations to the council. Hopefully, those recommendations are an aid to encourage more people to become, and very importantly, to remain as foster carers with our council. The findings from the review look to support the council's ambition to increase the number of locally recruited foster carers and to reduce the reliance on external placements. Having more of our own foster carers will not only provide a financial saving to the council, but will most importantly help support the delivery of the best outcomes for our looked after children, as the saving can be reinvested in providing more and or improved services for our children. The findings and the 7 recommendations from the review are detailed in pages 91 to 97, and there is a summary of those recommendations on pages 90 across pages 97 and 98 in the agenda pack. I'd like to make some special comment with regard to all our members that took part in the review, the county councillors that worked together, and again, for the benefit of the children, there was absolutely no political element to this, which was fantastic. But I just want to say, from our officers, Amanda Collinson, and I know isn't here today, Jenny Whiston and Matt Wesson, thank you very much for your support in this process, because it made the task so much easier for us all. And I think that we came out with some better outcomes. And finally, Martin, you know, your work often goes unnoted, and you know, you and James have helped tremendously in this as well. And I just wanted to put that forward for noting. So I move the recommendation for the report on page 99, and I seek a seconder. Councillor Quigley, thank you very much. So officers are here, but they're here to answer any technical questions. But I now open this discussion to the floor for debate. Sure. Councillor Callaghan, would you like to comment? Because you're allowed. You may be an observer, but you're vice chairman of this committee, and as chairman, I'd love for you to be able to comment.
Well,
because you've been instrumental in what we came out of as recommendations.
Well, I've got to agree, actually. It was very positive and very proactive from all members, and especially the officers, who gave us lots of ideas to scope things out for going forward, and also to look at the private foster carers. You know, I think, because we've got Michael and Michelle here, I think we should look at some legislation to cap some of the profits that these private foster carers or private agencies are making out of our vulnerable children and families, because it's a disgrace. And it's really, really upsetting when I think about that. So no matter what Notts County Council does, the private sector will always gazump them. So it's not a winnable situation that we're in, and we've got so many vulnerable children in our areas, well, across the country as well. So I do think we do need some sort of legislation on how much profit, and some of them are hedge funds as well. They're not even from this country, which makes it even more sickening. So I'd like to think that we could do something about that.
Thank you, Anne. Points very well made.
Just to reassure Anne, if I may, Chair, and thank Anne for her work and you, Chair, for your work in this regard. It's a core commitment as part of the Children and Schools and Wellbeing Bill, and so it hasn't got through its final stages of Parliament yet. But yeah, you need to keep pressing us on it. But it is in there in the bill.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Before I come to you, may I just say that the one bit that I missed out was that this report was not intended to try and ask any cabinet members to suck eggs or to try and tell you how to do your job. It was intended as a deep dive for us as a select committee to look at the opportunities and hopefully maybe find some different levers that we can use, because as we say, the remuneration itself is not necessarily a lever that we can use if we continually gazump, but we did look at some other options which may be of benefit. Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. And it was actually to pick up on Councillor Callaghan's point and Councillor Payne's commitment to sort of supporting those efforts. It's probably just worth making Michael and Michelle aware, because obviously I get drawn into lead members' briefings in current role. And one we had probably within the last month with the representatives from the department gave me a little bit of concern about this. So whilst we've still seen the headline about an intention to cap fees, there's a marked stepping away from that at present. The way that was explained if I explain, the way that was explained in the briefing makes a degree of sense in pragmatic terms, in the context of the volume of supply in the market, in the external market, the profit-making market for these places is significant. If government were to act act decisively in a way that took away those profit margins in a flash, there is a risk, or a perceived risk, that providers would move away from the market, which would create a different kind of problem altogether. So absolutely pressing, but I'm just making you aware that from briefings I've had elsewhere, there would appear to be a little bit of stepping back from making a clear and decisive change at present. Now, if that is the case, we need to make sure we are still pressing so that an appropriate and evolutionary change is made. So I say that purely so that you have that other information when you're carrying your conversations forward, because there's clearly a hesitancy at present about the impact of being too firm and decisive, potentially on damaging supply and creating a whole other set of problems for us as local authorities trying to purchase provision.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy.
Just on that point of the nature, thanks, Tracy. That's really, really helpful. I think two things. I think it's right that the government needs to be pragmatic, notwithstanding the commitments that were made in the bill, because clearly any major disruption in the market, as you said, has an impact on individuals. But I think the second side of the coin can also be true, and it's my view, you absolutely cannot have people profiteering out of an horrific situation, threatening the government or threatening the sector either, and I think we should have no trouble with that. And I think that's why Anne's right to challenge and you're right to challenge, and Michelle and I will carry on making representations to ministers. I think it's pretty abhorrent if people who are profiteering out of this are making threats about withdrawing their labour or their organisations. Frankly, if that's what we want to do, clear off.
Well, whether
we
it's
don't
a
want
threat,
you in,
I don't know.
no,
It's
but
clearly
whether it is or isn't,
it's
Tracy,
an
we don't want them in the system if that's if they're there simply for profit and they're not there for the reasons that people ought to be there, then we don't want them there. So I think it's right that the government and officials are being pragmatic and listening, as you said, to the evidence on the ground. But I also think we need to be pretty firm with people who are simply there just to profit make in the obscene way that we have seen some individual agencies do. So we will carry on pressing, Chair.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much. Thanks for those words of support. I am going to move on to Jen and Matt in a moment, but I do want to just recognise, Councillor Taylor, the work that you've done for a number of years now in this area. I know that sometimes groups don't always agree with each other. We don't always agree with everything within our group, but the work that you do, the professional way that you do in your department is something I certainly learned from. And then I know as leader, you bang this drum so loud within our group and within the council. So thank you. Jenny, ladies first. Really would appreciate your comments and your thoughts on this task finish review process.
Well, I think to probably speak for Matt and myself, it's been a really enjoyable experience there. It's been nice to share all the information we've got about foster care, raised ideas in terms of retention and recruitment, and we know from meeting the foster carers themselves, they're welcoming any ideas to try and be supportive of which we talk. It feels like we're in a good place. That we're really moving forward. Culture in the field in fostering feels really positive. We haven't had any carers leave for a little while, which is also encouraging. With a lady now and stuff like that. But they've also made far more placements recently as well. So we are trying to work with carers and encourage that where at all possible. So it's been really, really positive experience.
Yeah, just to echo what Jenny said, we went to last Monday. We went to a regional D20 fostering learning event where we had over 100 of our carers. If anything, our partners in D20 were saying, "Can you stop promoting it? Because we've got over 100 carers from Nottinghamshire and 40 from the other areas." Really keen to go. Really good day. And Jenny and I and Amanda went. And some of the feedback we were getting from foster carers saying people are listening to us and at all levels, which is fantastic. And I think that the feeling now within fostering is the can-do, solution-focused. How do we work together from ideas. We've got one foster carers partner who wants to set up another halves group for those who aren't the primary carers and to offer some support to those people who sometimes can feel a bit sidelined with not being the primary carer. So he's recently retired and said, yes, I want to do more. And we've got another person who's linked with the university to talk to students about what it's like being a foster carer. So really dynamic, can-do, creative thinking. And I think Jenny and I and Amanda, in her absence, are just very appreciative of the open ears that we've got and the creative ideas of how we can work better all together to make fostering in Nottinghamshire something that what people want to do and that we can be really proud of.
Thank you. Thank you both. Mike.
As a past foster carer myself, I've brought up several things which we always found confusing, and we didn't find out until we were well into the process that we could claim for holidays and school uniforms, and which is why the recommendation came out that we should include all these payments in the thing. We're not a million miles away from the private sector payments, and people want to be foster carers. The fact that we're employing agencies at £1,000 a week when we could be saving £300 or £400 of that every week if we encourage people, and we wouldn't need to up our rates by a significant amount. And if the government can bite the bullet and start capping these fees, then I think we're in a win-win situation. I mean, I was offered, and my wife were offered to go to a private foster. We weren't in it for the money. We were in it because we wanted to help children that were struggling. And I think most people, although having said that, I was on the fostering panel, and we did have one or two cases where we had to get rid of some foster carers who were in it for the money and other reasons. But no, I think the majority of foster carers are in it because they want to help children and not to make a financial gain out of it. And as long as it covers the costs, then most people, I think, are fairly happy. And we're not, as I say, we're not a million miles away in terms of the rates.
I understand to that. We are trying to make the offer to foster carers not all about money. It's about the fact we offer excellent training, we offer support, we're trying to change the culture of social work, supporting foster carers, working better with the virtual school, working better with health. So carers in their own entirety feel more professionalised and feel supported in a very, very difficult job that we're doing.
And just to further add to that, we feel, well, I don't want to celebrate too early, but we feel like that has had some success because we've currently got 3 people who are independent foster agency workers who want to come over to Nottinghamshire. So we're currently doing the assessments and doing the fast track process to get them over to come and work for us, which, you know, it hasn't happened for several years, I've been told. So that's really positive as well.
Okay, that's fantastic. And can I just say, Mike, your contribution to the panel was very significant. The fact that you have direct experience in this area was very welcome, and your insight and sometimes some of your challenge to us was fantastic. So thank you. If there's no other comments, I'm going to ask for a show of hands on a vote on the recommendation on page 99. So can I show of hands on that, please? Carried. Thank you very much. And lastly, we're talk about the work programme. Do any members have any comments or suggestions with regard to the work programme? Obviously, we are at the end of our municipal period, and
it runs on slightly because of how it was all set up. So it is quite useful. So there are items on the agenda for the first meeting after the election, but we will be doing a similar process to what we did last year, with everyone coming together to have that discussion, and Colin will be there to tell you what's happening. So, but yeah, the work programmes are, and there's also, if anything comes in between, let us know, and that can be fed into those discussions.
So we agreed on that. May I just say, so this is the last select committee before the election. Whatever happens on May the 1st, what it will happen. I was asked by Ben if I would take this committee, and I thought, why I'm not experienced. He gave me a number of reasons why I should. Like I say, it's been something I absolutely feel is a very humbling experience as well as a privilege. And thank you all.
Gosh, you've had me on it. That's all.
There's pros and cons with every job, as you know. Okay, with that, we'll close the meeting.
Very good.
Very good.